Welcome, Dracuphiles, to Sundays with Dracula. Welcome to my house. Enter freely and of your own will. Wow, is it the last time I'm going to say that? This is the final episode of Sundays with Dracula. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach in Philadelphia, the home of Bram Stoker's Notes for Dracula, over 100 pages of outlines, early plot ideas, and research notes compiled by the author over the 7 years he developed and wrote the book. It is an extraordinary record of the conception and development of a novel. And I'm even going to share a few pages of that today, some weird things we did not see in the notes that don't really directly connect to the plot. So I've never paid any, and they're usually pages that people don't pay any attention to. So I'm going to share a couple of those today. And joining me today are all 5 of our illustrious co-hosts. So I will have to barely talk today at all. This will be amazing. I'll probably go through like 3 pipes during this show. Joining me today is Tucker Christine, Dracula collector and musical director of Sundays with Dracula, and soon to be musical director of Sundays with Frankenstein. Josh O'Neill, Eisner and Harvey award-winning editor, author, curator, and creator of Dracula the Evidence. Josh Hitchens, actor, horror theater maker, and creator of the Going Dark Theater podcast. Mary Going, PhD candidate at Sheffield Gothic, and Dr. Lauren Nixon, a graduate of Sheffield Gothic. Together, they are the Ghoul Guides. Welcome, everyone.
Hey, Ed.
Hi.
Hello, everybody.
And you can all look at each other because this is the first time you're all meeting each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It's very surreal. I've seen all your faces so much.
And now you can talk to each other today. So what are you guys drinking today? Anything special? Anybody?
I just got coffee in my drink. Eat cake for breakfast.
Eat cake for breakfast. That is a good thing to do.
Coffee as well.
Tea in England, I'm sure.
Tea, yeah. Totally predictable.
Am I allowed to show? I'm being extremely corporate.
That was a sponsored plug, right?
There
Yeah.
you go.
If Diet Coke could sponsor me, that would be great. That would
Wow,
really
yes.
help the future of my career.
Go for that. I'm sure Tucker's drinking alcohol with me.
Yeah, I am. I'm starting off with a scotch called Inferno Toffee Pudding.
Ooh,
It tastes exactly like it's called.
cool.
But I will not be finishing with that because that is 130 proof, and I will not make it.
Sundays with Tucker getting drunk. Yes, I'll watch that show, definitely. So, I mean, you've all watched me get loaded every Sunday. I made a special drink for today, and not with the Tamworth product, because I just wanted to kind of do my own drink for the final show. And I just thought I would mix it with some of my favorite things. So it's a whiskey drink because I tend to love, I think I even love whiskey more than gin nowadays. And I use this Kinsey port wine cask whiskey, which is good. It's not my favorite of the Kinsey whiskeys, but I do like it. It's whiskey finished in a port wine, barrel. And then it's got a little bit of Benedictine in it. And then a little shot of the cherry hearing from Copenhagen. So that was in honor of Niels today. And a couple cherries, and I'm calling this drink the happiness you bring. So it is a drink with some of my the hearing is something I discovered during the run of this show. So it is a drink dedicated to everybody who has watched this show and all of you guys. So cheers to you all.
Good.
Ooh, and it's very good. I also have a beer back today. I've got a porter back here, a Washington's porter from Yards. So, and then after the show, I've got lined up my Redbreast Irish whiskey, and I'll probably have a cigar when we're done the show. So, pipes on the show. After the show, I'll have a cigar. So, and it's like smoking a cigar. You don't want to do that on a camera anyway. You look like a jerk. So, but I'll finish my pipe today on the show. So for the last 27 weeks, we have illuminated, unraveled, disentangled Bram Stoker's novel about bloodsuckers in the 1890s, one chapter at a time. Like you guys, I'm sure this is the first time you've ever done this kind of project. And I wanted to point out something I started talking about last week that for the audience, many of you who have watched every show, which I'm astounded with. And at the end of today, if you've watched every show, that's 64 hours.
Wow.
And if you've also watched all 18 hours of Monday Drac Chat, that's 82 hours. If you also watch David Scal and Mark Gatiss programs, that's 85 hours. And if you're doing the Read the Blood of Dracula course with me, as a few of you are, there will be 10 hours when that finishes next month. So 95 hours of talking about Dracula and vampires. I've made videos for this.
When does the special edition DVD box set come out?
Yeah, it's got to be a box set. Yes. So
We need a behind the scenes.
Yeah, and the coffin, it'll be a coffin shaped, box that we can put it all in and do all that. So
yeah, we need commentaries also on top of the episodes.
Yep.
Where we talk about what we're talking about.
I want to, and yes, we could have a commentary track. Oh, that's brilliant. We should definitely do that. I want to
annotate Sundays with Dracula.
I want to
annotated edition.
An annotated annotation.
I want to know if there's anybody in the audience who has done the entire thing. I'm not sure, because I think it's easy to miss a Drac Chat, or it was easy maybe to miss a course meeting, or maybe you missed one of the specials. So I wonder if anybody has done absolutely everything. So and we'll see if that is true. Yeah, Adam missed one Drac Chat. So I think perfect attendance is always also a matter of luck, and I know that, but I would still give an award out. So I used to tell my students that perfect attend. I used to get prizes to perfect attendance in my class, and recognizing fully that it's also a matter of luck. You just didn't happen to get sick. So but Laura says she thinks she did all of them. Oh, I don't care if you watch some of the some of the episodes not live. That's fine. Allie Vallon is 100%. So there you go. So thank you, Allie. And some people have done all of them. Elizabeth G is 100. Well done. It's almost 100 hours. So it's crazy town that we've done this. Let me say for the last time, at least in this run, that Bram Stoker's notes for Dracula are just one of the many gems of the Rosenbach's collections. You guys can go online. You can see some of our collections guides, gallery gateways of past exhibitions. We have a new exhibition up right now called I Am an American, about the poet, author, activist Alice Dunbar Nelson. We're still posting more virtual courses and programs. There's some really cool behind the bookcase programs. We have one coming up on our miniature portraits. The Rosenbach has hundreds of portrait miniatures from, across the centuries. And there's going to be a little behind the bookcase presentation on that coming up in October. I'm sorry, October, December, all months should be October. But if you guys have any questions there, I see there's already a couple questions in the Q&A box. Yeah, Elizabeth Fuller tells me I should find 5 more hours to hit 100 by the end of the year. So maybe we'll do that. Maybe I'll have a little Christmas vampire show and we could just up the hours to hit 100. You
go until 8 o'clock tonight.
I can, so it's really late for Lauren and Mary to go that late though. So,
Unfortunately, I have to go to work. Otherwise, we would definitely do an all-nighter.
Work. This is work. This can be make this your work.
If you retcon your birthday party, we're halfway there, right?
Oh, that's true, actually, because my birthday was long. That was like 2.5 hours at least, I think. Maybe 3. When we listened to Orson Welles' Dracula, my birthday, that was fun. But if you guys have questions, put them in the Q&A box. I'll definitely ask. And questions for our co-hosts, because they're all on here together today, which is really awesome. But the first thing I wanted to ask the 5 of you, because you all nobody was with me on the last chapter. I just had it with Christopher Frayling, which was totally awesome, to be able to have him talk, even more, which is one of the reasons I did it, because I knew he would, I'd have the opportunity for him to talk even more, and he didn't disappoint, with the things that he was throwing out there. But I wanted to ask you guys, what did you think of the last chapter of this novel, the finale, the destroying the vampire brides, how Dracula was destroyed, all of that? Anybody want to go first?
I saw a lot of the complaints in the chat, or not the complaints, but the discussion about it being anticlimactic. And I can see that. I can see feeling that way, but I don't personally feel that way. I think that they hit enough problems going into the climax that the climax is enough. What happens? It's everything we need, in my opinion.
I'd also think we're used to the big fight at the end of, an adventure story. And it's kind of a fight, but not real. Like Dracula doesn't get out and they, have an all-out brawl with Dracula, which is going to happen in any movie you make now. And I think modern audiences are far more accustomed to that. But I'm not sure the 1897 audience would have thought this was extraordinarily thrilling of a conclusion. So.
Yeah,
I think the structure. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was just saying it's a lot more in keeping with like a early 19th century Gothic novel. They tend to resolve pre the final chapter.
Mm-hmm.
So you have like the climax in the third to last chapter, and then everyone lives happily ever after.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like it's
a
kind of
wrap up chapter. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but no, we don't get that here. We just get the wrap up note.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I always find the structure, not just of the final chapter, but of the whole last sort of section of the book, sort of strange, because Dracula doesn't really do anything in the whole last 8 chapters of the book. I mean, he's such a force of nature throughout the entire book, and he spends the entire sort of thrilling final act of the book just sitting in a coffin, and then eventually is killed without even waking up. So I do find it a bit anticlimactic and odd that it was approached that way. There's a lot of exciting stuff in the chapter. The stuff with Mina and the brides, I think, is fantastic. But I do think it's a very odd and interesting choice from Stoker, just almost sideline the villain. I mean, they're going after him, and there's a lot of tension about whether they're going to get him, but he doesn't do anything. He just waits to be killed, basically, which I do find very, very strange and interesting.
Josh, you also adapted this. So did it bother you that Dracula's locked in a box for the whole, end of your show that you do? Like once he issues that threat to them in the house in Piccadilly, you don't get any more Dracula, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for me, in my one-person version of Dracula, the end is really where I did most of my condensing of the events of the novel. In my version of it, that moment happens, and then it's right off to Transylvania. So I cut a lot of that chase out just for time's sake, so it wouldn't be a 3-hour long one-man Dracula. Although
I'm fine with that.
It would get us to 100.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah. But I'm also, as I mentioned in the chat last week, I am very much in the camp of Dracula is not killed at the very end for reasons that were talked about in the episode. That throughout the entire book, they're very specific on what you have to do to kill a vampire, and Van Helsing even does that with the sisters in that final chapter, but that's not how they kill Dracula. And I love when they're describing the castle, and every stone of its broken battlements was articulated against the light of the setting sun. So in the way I perform it, I sort of do it with a little bit of a it's not over yet. So it doesn't really bother me, because I think it does lend itself to the interpretation that perhaps they have not finished what they set out to do.
Mm-hmm. Mary, how'd you like the ending of this book, this last chapter?
I don't hate it, but I think
Mary, that's our classic line. Yeah. I didn't hate it.
Yeah.
No, but I think it's very empty in a way that the book is empty, in that there's an absence, and the absence is Dracula. And you talked about this with Christopher Frayling. We don't get Dracula's perspective at all throughout the book, and here, especially in the last few chapters, and especially in that last chapter, you're seeing what's happening from afar. You're having his kind of experience filtered through Mina. You don't actually see his perspective or get his words or any of that, and he dies, or maybe he dies, and then they go back and they have this child and Quincy's dead, and it's like, oh, okay. So I do mean it when I say I don't hate it. I quite like it as an ending, but I think it's empty because the book is missing something for me, and that is Dracula.
Yeah. We get that extraordinary moment that Mina describes, a look on his face, right, though, Mary? That look of peace that comes. I
find that really interesting, because I think you get that with Lucy as well, when she's killed, but again, it's that it's
Lucy,
a perspective,
it, right? We expected with Lucy because we understood she was a good person beforehand, but Dracula's only the monster. And
but it's always filtered. Lucy's death scene is filtered through other men's perspectives, and again with Dracula's death scene, you get it written from Mina's perspective, and Mina says that she sees this look of peace, which are, do we trust her? I think that then comes down to the fact that these are all written documents, and how much do we believe what they're saying? But that idea of joy, of peace rather, it kind of falls into that kind of Christian notion of peace in death, and there being a peace in the afterlife, and they've saved Dracula like they saved Lucy, like they saved the three weird sisters through death. So it's a very Christianized message of, yes, we've killed the monster, hooray for us.
It also does that really gothic thing of like minimizing the threat towards the end. So this happens a lot, like Mysteries of Udolpho, the central threat, the main antagonist, kind of disappears for the final third of the novel, and it's a really anticlimactic end. Sorry to like give spoilers to if you had read it, but like this is
a 300-year-old novel.
300-year-old novel.
200.
But this is something that is done quite often, that like the final portion of the novel, the threat is no longer a threat, and it's much more about what are you going to do to take down the threat, and how close do you come to the threat? What does that mean for you? There is that anxiety here with Mina, that she's becoming more monstrous. They're going to kill things, like Quincy dies. There is still this, I think we talked about this last time we were on, like the trauma. But it is quite a common trope. I also found it quite anticlimactic the first time I read it. I don't know how much it's meant to be left open to interpretation. I kind of lean towards the meta text element. This is a set of documents, so it's kind of like mirroring Frankenstein in that way, that it's a set of documents. When you're telling a story through documents, why would you carry on writing documents afterwards? So like it has to end, and maybe there's another set of documents afterwards. We don't know. We just have this set of documents. Yeah,
that's all the adaptations that have been done.
So we don't have any other set of documents. So it does it for a meta text. It's a really good ending, because that's what would happen when we have historical documents. We're not like, oh, and here's the rest of it. You're just like, here's the journal leading up to this event, and the next bit might not exist, because you don't know if that person carried on writing, because would they have any reason to carry on writing? So from that perspective, it's quite satisfying. But I think the first time I read it, I was like, what? I thought they were gonna like shoot each other, and there's gonna be all this stuff. Very different to Mary and I watched Coppola's Dracula on Halloween. And I think it made me realize how difficult it is to end an adaptation of Dracula again.
Yeah.
Because the stage adaptation I saw, they had a really weird fight scene where like Van Helsing's punching people. And Arthur is one character, like Arthur, Quincy, and Homewood are like all one character. It was very strange. It did not work. They were like, here's a frail old man. Now he's punching vampires.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's what makes it kind of so open to adaptation, and why people, it's, you know, makes it easy to give sequels, which is great.
Josh O'Neill, anything special from the last chapter that you did? I mean, you're obviously not adding a kukri knife in, you know, in Dracula the Evidence, but was there anything from this last chapter or from the end that was kind of special in the Evidence project you're creating?
Well, in a way, like that final entry, which I always think it's an interesting choice that it's situated not shortly after the events, but 7 years after the events take place.
Yeah.
That last chapter was almost, I mean, that last entry is almost the whole genesis. It almost feels like an invitation to do a project like this. Because it's literally saying, we don't have any of these original documents. So like there's no reason you should believe this because you can't actually look at any of this stuff. So, I mean, the first time I read the book, as I had been pondering how cool it would be to actually be able to see these documents, I felt like Bram Stoker was asking someone to do that. It's almost like a playful kind of like, oh, if only we had the real stuff. So I also think it's interesting that it's so much down the line, and that ties into our big question of dating Dracula, which is something that we struggled with a lot. But it almost implies that that final note is supposed to be contemporaneous with the publication of the book, because the closest we can figure out is probably that Stoker was intending something like 1892 or 1893 for when the narrative takes place, even though there's some stuff that's inconsistent with that. I think that's probably just errors by Stoker.
He's just Conan Doyle writing Sherlock Holmes. I'm really not going to bother to make sure I situate perfectly.
Right. But I think he was kind of picturing, okay, around then. And then that does fit with like 7 years later, 6+ years later, it was when it was published. So it almost brings the publication of the novel into the world of the novel, because it's like, oh, now this situates you as the reader in the present tense with Mina. So I find that really fascinating.
And it was originally, is it Tucker? Do you know, is it 11 years or was it 12 years in the TypeScript?
I don't remember.
Okay, it's either 11 or 12 years in the TypeScript that he crosses it out and writes 7.
Right.
So,
I mean, you wonder if that's like, he's like, okay, that's the distance between now and then. But yeah, I find that really interesting. And then, I mean, we have this whole concept. But one of the challenges is they mentioned a number of times in the book how carefully the sequence of the documents has been arranged chronologically. And now, of course, the novel is not arranged chronologically, and we wanted to present the TypeScript in the sequence of the novel so it can sort of act as a guide through the rest of the documents. You can say, okay, what should I read next? Mina's letter from this date. I can see that in the TypeScript. I'll go find that in the box. So we had this concept where we made the TypeScript that's bound by little removable brackets, and has a new cover that Mina has put on it that says Our Year Through the Flames on the cover. So it's almost like she's taken this thing and rearranged it herself years later into more of a narrative. So the idea is that you as the reader can also disassemble the TypeScript and rearrange it into chronological order if you want the order it would have originally been in. So that stuff all went into our thinking of how to design this thing.
I want to hit some of these questions that are already starting to come in. And I'm going to start with the first one. Not the first question that came in, but I'll take one of these from Gretchen. She was wondering how I found all the co-hosts for this show. And I think I probably let that out in little bits, throughout, the episodes. But when I realized that, this would be a great idea, come up with, this 27-week chapter by chapter, a dream for especially an academics here. You guys are a dream to be able to like take that much time with the text, because that never happened again in your teaching career. Like you never get to do this like really slow working through the book for 7 months. The idea of doing that, and I thought, oh, I'll just do that, and then I thought, I can't just talk for the whole time. That would be like, it'd be interesting maybe in the beginning, and then it would get kind of boring just listening to this guy talk for, week after week. So I realized I need people to talk to. So, all right, Dracula people. Who do I know Dracula people? Tucker and Josh Hitchens were the first on my, list. Like, all right, I know Josh, and I've known Josh for years and his performances. And I know Josh knows this text inside and out from adapting it. And he's also great talking to people and doing this kind of thing. So Josh was a lock. So you were the lock, Josh, on the top of my list. And then I put out, and then Tucker I knew as well. And I knew Tucker's a collector, but I also knew that Tucker, this is the first time you've done something like this, right?
Yep.
Yeah, Tucker likes to be behind the scenes. He likes to like collect and create things and then enjoy people talking about them. But I understood that Tucker had so many years of, knowledge that he had built up and expertise and listening to all these people and reading all these books and collecting all these books. So I thought it would be such a great perspective to have Tucker on. So I asked him, and he was on board for it. And then I put out actually a call on Facebook and said, anybody know anybody? And that's why Kyle Cassidy, a photographer from Philadelphia who I know, recommended Josh O'Neill. He's like, how about Josh with the Dracula the Evidence Project? I was like, oh my God, that's a great idea. Because Josh, we were already in contact about your Dracula the Evidence Project, about bringing the Rosenbach into that as a benefit for one of the levels in your Kickstarter. So I was like, of course, I should have thought of that ahead of time. And I asked Josh, and then I realized, shit, it's old guys talking about Dracula. This is not what this show should be. I really need some different perspectives. And I looked around the whole BIPOC spectrum too. And I really thought I would get anybody on the show who was not just, an older white male on the show. And I say older, guys, sorry if I'm putting you in my camp. I know you're not as old as me, but there you go. And then I actually looked at Sheffield Gothic right away, and I thought maybe there'd be some connections there. I think I contacted Sam George at Sheffield Gothic, and
Sam George is from Open Graves, Open Minds.
Open Graves, Open Minds. That was
our friends in Hertfordshire.
Sheffield Gothic, yeah. And then just kept searching, and I sent like a few emails out. I think I even sent an email to Kaja Frank too at Open Minds. But I found you guys on Sheffield Gothic doing things, and I was like, oh my gosh, you guys are great. and maybe you would be interested in this. So as soon as, Mary and Lauren said, yeah, we'd like to do it, I was like, oh, well, that's, and I didn't want to add any more after that. And I thought about, I could have. I thought I could just have co-hosts all season long who changed, but then I thought it would be best to have a core group who would keep returning and that people would like. And now Mary and Lauren are coming back. You guys are going to be with us for Frankenstein, which I'm very excited for, and so is everyone else. Here's a first question from Jennifer Phillips for you guys. She says, okay, panelists, got to ask, what was your favorite part of the book? And I want to kind of amend that. So I'd love to know your favorite part. And I'd also love to know if there was a part of this book that doing this surprised you, or you got something extra out of, which is different than a favorite. So who wants to go first?
I think it's pretty cliche, but the first 4 chapters I think are the best part of this book. I think it was it Lovecraft that said the first 4 chapters are the best novella ever written, and yeah. I don't think that's wrong. It's so good. The whole book is excellent, but that it just pulls you in to the point where you have to finish it after that.
Mm-hmm. And wish there was more of that as you're going along.
Yeah.
You know?
You wonder where that bit's coming back.
Anything surprise you, Tucker, in doing the deep dive into this?
I was actually thinking about that earlier this week. Nothing, I shouldn't say nothing. I really, really liked when, I think it was you, came to the conclusion that the August 30th letter from Lucy to Mina was written under Dracula's influence and it's not misdated. And I think that makes so much sense. And I'm going with that from the rest of my readings, you know.
That's a deep geek dive right there.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
I really, in my mind, that was Stoker's intention, and I think he'd be surprised that it took 120 years for people to figure it out.
Who else? Who wants to go?
I'll go next.
Go ahead.
I think my favorite part's still the Whitby parts, and I don't know if that's because we went to Whitby a lot when I was growing up. So like I know Whitby really well. And I have lots of fun memories of it. So when they're in Whitby, I can visualize it really easily and I find it really emotive.
I brought you into Whitby too, right? Didn't you start the show when we started the Whitby?
Mary's been to Whitby as like a project.
Yeah, no, I mean, the first time you guys were on the show, was that the Whitby chapter? I'm trying to remember.
Yes, it was. Yeah,
okay.
We came for chapter 4, I think. So it was
no, so not the Whitby chapters yet. You were actually the chapter before.
I think we were in the chapter just before, we were the last chapter of Jonathan. I think our second chapter was the one where Mina chases Lucy.
You got that one. That's a good one.
We were saying like that is a long run.
Yeah.
Like it's not a quick kind of hop. But Whitby's really scary at night. Like we used to go and stay in like a hotel and there was no light. And when you walked back from Whitby, you had to walk up this hill and it was pitch black. And we used to freak each other out, telling each other that like there was like a small pet cemetery in the garden of this place we used to stay, and we used to freak each other out and tell each other that it was haunted, and it just has that vibe. So I think when I read those chapters, I can really kind of get into it, and I just still love it so much. And I think Mina and Lucy have a great female friendship, which is not something that a lot of contemporary Gothic takes from the 18th century Gothic. You know, it's one of the things that I really love about the late 18th century novels is that female friendship is such an important part of them. Mina and Lucy have a really beautiful friendship, and it makes Lucy's death so tragic because Mina loses her. I mean, the suitors are there too, but mostly Mina and Lucy is what I'm interested in.
Whitby, you guys have been to Whitby. I can't remember. Tucker, were you in Whitby?
No, I was planning it when everything shut down.
That's right. And Josh's, have you guys been to Whitby?
No, never been to England at all.
Here's a show, right? When the shutdown ends and the world is open again, all 6 of us go to Whitby, and we can even do a show in Whitby. That would be awesome. So there you go. I got that one in my back pocket. I'm ready to.
I can guarantee you've never had fish and chips like the fish and chips from Whitby.
Oh, I love fish and chips.
Best place.
So, yeah, I'm ready. I'm going as soon as I can now. So
yeah, Whitby's fantastic.
Was there a moment, Lauren, that surprised you in this novel?
I think not necessarily surprised, but I think there was a couple of times where reading back over things I'd suspected or felt kind of were really kind of reconcreted for me. So some of the things kind of around Mina and Jonathan, about like the sympathy and the empathy that Mina feels for Dracula, the kind of idea of Van Helsing potentially being this kind of semi-crazed cultist. There's just a couple of things that I think when we were kind of really digging them out, I was like, yeah, that's an intentional part of the text. Like that is intentionally written in. It's not just a feeling that I got reading it, you know, in the 21st century. Like that is intentionally written in there. So I think there's maybe even scope to kind of look back and think about the perspective. And I think just the metatext as well, you know, because we were looking at it so deeply and actually saying, no, that doesn't make sense because that letter's written there and that letter's written there and this person writes this, but this person writes this. I think it really highlighted the metatext aspect and the space in between the letters
Yeah.
and the diary entries, like it's massively infallible. Like it seems like such a reliable narration because it's so well documented that it tricks you into thinking that it's super reliable, and you forget that actually this is intended to be people's perspectives. It's
And
not
the way I approach this is kind of a lot like the way Josh O'Neill approached it for his project, and it's really the result of me doing all this Sherlock Holmes reading and Sherlockian things. Is that like that approach? Do you that that kind of meta approach to the way everything is put together? And I mean, that's not usually what you do in academic study, right?
It depends on what school you are.
Oh, there you go. So
there are a lot of Gothic scholars in particular that look at metatextuality and consider the text as a text, as a compiled text. So not the author's creation, but taking it as it's intended to be taken. So we are told as reader, this is a collection of diary entries, letters, documents. So if we read it as those things, what do we learn and where do we find in between? Mary and I are more kind of literary historians, so we think about things like the cultural impact, what is it responding to at the time. So we do that kind of thing, but certainly not usually in this kind of depth. So there is a school of academia that would look at this type of thing, but it is a very new school, and they tend to be more interested in postmodern texts because they're the ones that do it more explicitly. But there's definitely, it'd be really interesting when we get to Frankenstein, because that is one of the things that has been talked about a lot with Frankenstein, which is fascinating when you think there's nearly a century between these two novels. And they do things very, very similarly in that way that you kind of, Margaret Atwood does this as well. It seems so authentic when you're reading it that you believe everything that you're being told. And then it's only when you think back at it at the end that you realize that this wasn't a third person omniscient narration. You've been reading someone's first-hand narration and you kind of forgot to question them as you would any normal person telling you a story. And I love it when texts do that. Cool. That kind of challenge to you as a reader as to how you interpret it.
Yeah. How about you other three? How about you other three? Anything that, or what's your favorite part? Go ahead, Josh.
What Lauren just said really resonates with me and how I enjoy the book. I think maybe my favorite part is the Mina hypnosis chapter, which I just think it's really interesting. It's like the place where the supernatural and the scientific kind of maybe merge the most in the book, and we have this really sort of eerie magical thing which is sort of related to this like new medical but also sort of metaphysical obsession with hypnosis. But just in terms of like what the experience of reading it this way was like, it's something I'm very interested in generally as a reader, is just unusual ways of engaging with text, just things that kind of shake you out of the mode of just consumption of entertainment, of just reading something, and you sort of understand this experience of being a reader and having a story fed to you, stuff that makes you like engage with your critical capacities more and kind of makes you reckon with the text in totally different ways. And to me, that like the whole fun of the project that we've been working on, I mean, from my perspective, is that I get to read Dracula in a really different way than I had ever read it before working on this project. Because you have to essentially role play as the characters. You have to think through how these documents would actually look. You have to think as Mina and go like, okay, she's writing this letter. Where is she sitting? How does she send this letter? Who is this letter for? Like, what is her intention with sending it? Like, you really have to try to sink into the heads of the characters. And that's been very interesting throughout this process of doing that in a more temporal way. Because I'm used to, at this point, trying to get into their heads in terms of how they're producing these documents. But when you do it over the course of the exact amount of time that it took them to experience this thing and read the novel really slowly over the course of 6 months, you get much more into their experience of this really bizarre and harrowing thing that they went through. And it sort of draws you deeper into their world. And I feel like it's just super illuminating to, in a way, when you read the novel quickly, it simultaneously seems to happen faster and over a longer period of time, if that makes any sense. Like when you really think about, okay, this is 6 months out of their life. This is a crazy summer, basically. Yeah. It's insane to think about how much happens. But at the same time, it's like week by week, you feel them going through this thing and getting drawn deeper into this nightmarish experience. And it pulls you into the metatext of it in a really interesting and unusual way. And I'm looking forward to following along with Frankenstein too. I think that's going to be a super interesting way.
Have any of you ever done a real-time reading of a book that you kind of read in the real time of the book?
I don't think I ever have. I think
I mean, we obviously couldn't, line up. You can't line up actual time with this book, or if you do, you just have long stretches where you're not actually reading or doing anything. Like we even like a few weeks ago, we realized we were like 4 weeks or 5 weeks on like about 4 days in the novel, because so much happens from like when Dracula attacks, the insane asylum, and it takes like 4 weeks to cover those, or 4 chapters to cover those few days that happen there. But in effect, right now, or last week actually on the show, was roughly the same time as the characters at the beginning of the novel. And to think of all the experience I've had in the last 7 months, even just staying home and doing things, though, that's a long period of time, and to know that was the same thing, the same amount of time at least as these characters in the novel is a weird thing. So
it's really wild that this lined up with the pandemic the way it did too. It's just like, as everyone is trapped inside, it's been a very interesting. I feel like it's going to leave a gap in my life. Like now that it's ending.
The gap has already happened in my life.
It'd be nice if the end of the pandemic.
Yeah, if the pandemic ends tomorrow, like today is the last show, pandemic ends tomorrow, coronavirus over.
Suddenly the pandemic goes away. Go away, right? Yeah, no, it won't.
That's what happens in War of the Worlds.
I was thinking the same thing. War of the Worlds.
Everyone get a spray bottle.
It actually hit me this morning that it was over, because I prepared for every week as if I was going to be on. So I was, except for the 2 weeks that I had to work, I was ready if you had to call me. But I would read it once.
I had to do once, yeah.
So I would read it once straight through during the week. Then on Saturday night, I would read it with the Les Klinger annotations. Then on Sunday morning, every Sunday morning, I would throw on the audiobook and just walk until that chapter was over. And then this morning I woke up and there was no chapter to listen to.
There you go. And you're so good that you were walking. I've just been literally sitting in this chair for 90% of the pandemic. So I am so much fatter now than I was.
Same.
When it started. Yeah. Yeah, Josh, you too. Yeah. Somebody early on in the pandemic said, oh, we should all treat the pandemic as like, yeah, that time in my life when I got 6-pack abs. And I'm like, that time in my life when I drank more than I've ever drunk in my entire life. How about that? That's what the pandemic will be. So
I didn't even have an excuse. I had to physically go to work 3 days a week.
Yes,
and you did it.
Thank you. So you're actually out there on the front lines too, helping people. But no, this is my way of helping people. So Mary, Josh, one of you want to go? What's your favorite part and or surprising part?
I think just to add to what's already been said, I think what's been really interesting about this experience is that kind of what I like to call the idea of Gothic play. So which you get with that kind of metatextual and paratextual layering in the Gothic. The idea that you're presented with a text that's got all these documents, and this may or may not be true, and it's up to you, the reader, to kind of work out, is this authentic, is it not? And that idea of boundaries of what's real and what's not real, and just focusing on it over these past few weeks. Lauren knows I hate kind of like doing things one thing at a time. I binge watch things, or I binge read things. So this has been like really interesting to focus on like one chapter at a time, and really engage with it in that kind of metatextual way, and also, you know, why are certain texts ordered in the way that they are, and how do they influence each other, which again, that's another kind of idea of this Gothic play that I think comes across in Frankenstein a lot, in that you read one set of documents and then you read another one and it completely changes how you think about everything that you've just read. And I think, you know, seeing the kind of different narratives here, and then also especially what's missing. You know, we don't get a lot of Lucy, or at certain points we don't get much of Mina, and we don't get any of Dracula at all. And I really noticed that throughout this whole time, that actually, you know, Dracula's hardly in it at all. He's in the first bit, he's got a few cameo appearances, and then he's at the end, but it's mainly other people.
Yeah. Good, and keep the Frankenstein plugs going. So we're gonna
Not
get
hard.
there.
There's so many similarities.
I know.
Yeah.
They really are. I always say that. I think that you should look at these two texts together, Frankenstein and Dracula, because the way that I perceive the two main, there are kind of three narrative strands in Frankenstein, but the two main ones, you have Victor Frankenstein and then the Creature's manuscript. And I really think that the Creature's manuscript completely changes and shows you the flaws and the unreliability of Victor Frankenstein. And you don't get that here. You kind of, when you read it like this, you can think, oh, actually Van Helsing doesn't really know what he's talking about, or he's a little bit batshit. But you don't really have any kind of, you know, manuscript or letters that actually shows you that and says, what, you know, you're talking out, you know, whatever of your whatever,
talking
like,
out of your ass.
Yeah. And I think I always say that about these two texts. I think they go really well together when you're looking at that kind of, you know, the unreliable narrator and that idea of Gothic play and metatextuality. And it's just been really interesting to look at that week by week.
Good.
Yeah.
And that's a great segue to Josh Hitchens, because you guys, we always talk about Josh did a one-man Dracula show. He also did a one-man Frankenstein show, which actually debuted at the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia, which I did not get to see, and I was so bummed I didn't get to see it there. But you did it at the Rosenbach, and before you get to favorite parts, Josh, can you talk, because you've done both of these texts, can you talk about their similarities? And I'm not abandoning you. I'm just getting ice.
Yeah, no, I think everything that's been said about Frankenstein and Dracula being so similar is completely correct. And I agree with Mary in that I think Frankenstein as a text is in some ways better and a fuller picture than Dracula is, because you do get the creature's perspective and his whole story. Which sort of throws everything that you've learned from Victor into question. And I think that section of Frankenstein, the creature story, is for me absolutely the core of that book. And I think a piece of it that people who aren't as familiar with the book and are more familiar with film versions of Frankenstein, I think that's a surprise to a lot of folks, that you get this immensely articulate man who has gone through a significant amount of trauma and is trying to make his way in the world. And we never get Dracula's story in the way that we get the creature's story in Frankenstein. You know, there's little bits of Dracula's history that come through in the early chapters. Like I've always loved the detail, you know, in my heart through weary years of mourning over the dead is not attuned to mirth. Like, what's that about? You know, like that's a window into his past that we never get to hear, you know, where it comes from. And as far as favorite parts of Dracula, the book, I really love the whole Demeter sequence with the log of what happens. I think that is such a perfect Gothic ghost story all in its own. Like it really could stand by itself, I think. And it's very rarely, I think, given its due in the films. So that's a part that I love, and I love that I got to do that chapter coincidentally.
Did you like the BBC version of that, which is almost like an Agatha Christie kind of murder mystery episode? Did you like the way he put that together for the
I did. I thought that was a really interesting way to do it.
I say Agatha Christie because I know you love Agatha Christie too, and it really felt like an Agatha Christie murder mystery for that episode of the BBC Dracula.
Yeah, and as far as things that I've learned during this process, like for me with the novel, I've always felt that after Lucy's death, there's such a lull for me where they're basically being detectives and going all throughout London and finding the boxes and all the different residences. And that's all, frankly, like has been kind of boring to me in the past. It's the part of the book that I like the least. But going through it with this experience and really getting into the immense detail and the nuance of characterization that's happening in that section, it really gave me a much deeper appreciation for that segment of the book than I had before, which I think is awesome. I guess before it was definitely my least favorite, and going through it this time around, it's like, okay, like I see what Stoker's doing here. I see why this is necessary. So thank you all for that.
You are welcome. Absolutely. I wonder if you guys, and I sent you this ahead of time, I don't know if you would have any, do you guys have any questions for each other since you were all not on together? Did anybody come up with, and yeah, it's okay if you didn't, but this is your first time meeting. This is your chance. Did you guys have any questions for each other? The co-hosts, I mean.
I was curious, Josh, like what the most challenging part of putting together the one-man show was. Like which sections were you most stuck on?
For me,
hold on. I have a delivery. I have cocktail Franks. So I was just wondering whether or not they were coming. No, I would like nothing. I like to eat them neat. So
thank you, Ed. I'll have one.
Yes.
I know. Did you bring some for the class?
If I had a class, I would definitely have enough for the class. So, there we go. God, you could talk.
I don't know if you remember, Josh, but I saw your show in Kyle Cassidy's living room. It's really an incredible performance. And I was interested in the way you telescoped and combined certain aspects of it. So
wait. You saw it in Kyle's living room?
Yes.
So I actually met you. And we don't even know it. We didn't even remember. We actually met each other because I was there too. Wait, right. Josh, did you do it at Kyle's living room more than once?
No.
So I met you.
That's wild. That's why.
That's crazy.
At least 5 years ago, if not more.
More, I think, and that's crazy that I actually met you there. Funny. I didn't know it. So there you go. That's weird.
That's really wild. But it's such a cool performance. I mean, it really blew me away, the way you were able to capture so much of the book in such a simple and compelling format. It was very captivating. So I don't know if that's kind of a general question, but I was just interested in your experience of putting it together.
Sure. And thank you for that. When I first started writing it, the first section of it, the whole Jonathan in the castle section came very easily to me. And then the Demeter came very easily to me. And then I got to Whitby with Mina and Lucy. And like Lauren, I love their relationship so much and love them both individually as characters so much. There's just it's so great, everything that is in that section. And I got to that and realized, oh my God, how am I going to do this? How am I going to take the rest of this novel and do it in a way that's not, 6 hours long? So I actually got really stuck on that for a while because I wasn't sure where to go with it. And actually what helped me was I actually went to the Rosenbach and made an appointment and got to sit in a room with Stoker's notes and go through them. And I spent, I think, 3 hours there, and it was really one of the most profound experiences of my life, I think, because for me, like going through those notes and physically, having them in my hands, you can feel Stoker's excitement of what he was making over this period of years, just this joy that he was taking and putting this all together. And that really was the key for me to keep going. And so I ended up telescoping the Mina and Lucy quite a bit, which was very painful to do, but I think was necessary. And the other thing that I did to make the novel more manageable for a one-person show format is I have Arthur as a character, but he's mentioned, he doesn't speak. Quincy's eliminated, and a lot of what Arthur does, I transferred over to Dr. Seward. That's really the big sort of creative license I took in my adaptation of it. Partly because I was interested in the idea of these three major narrators with Jonathan and Mina and Dr. Seward, and then the other characters like Dracula and Van Helsing and Renfield and Lucy that come through them. But distilling it down that way really helped me telescope it into something that was manageable, and also just purely for the technical reason of like, there's only so many male British accents that I could do before they all started bleeding together. So that was a factor also in how I put the performance text together, is, how do I make it something that is faithful but digestible in 90 minutes and also within my range to do.
Well, here's a question for you then, Josh, because we've talked about this with Quincy on the show, and people have talked about it in chat, how so like Matt, who was a first-time reader Dracula, like he was like, Quincy, who the hell are you? Like Quincy is often deleted from adaptations, and you did as well. I think he is expendable for the plot's sake. I think that works, that like you don't need everybody to have the plot of this, go forward, but you missed an opportunity at the Quincy crazy talk. Was that, why did you cut Quincy?
I think again, because I was very interested in bringing Dr. Seward more to the fore, and his love or obsession for Lucy, as the case may be. And I mentioned him, Quincy, in the text, but I think I really wanted to keep it to that small core group of people who were narrating and concentrating on the folks who are actually keeping the records that compose the story. So as great comic relief as Quincy definitely could have been, I think it was the right decision to make it a smaller band of vampire hunters at the end.
Can you do a little mini Quincy show though, and just do all Quincy scenes? I would love
for
to
you,
see
Ed. Absolutely, anything. Yes.
That'd be hilarious.
Justice for Quincy.
Yes,
he's the only likable male character in Dracula,
yes, exactly.
in my opinion. He's kind of cool. Like
he's the best.
He doesn't make a big deal out of things. He's like strong. Yes. Like the rest of them are all terrible.
They're all terrible. I'm going to start a Quincy fan club. And Mary and I did joke about writing a alternate universe where it's just Quincy and Lucy and they just go vampire hunting around the world.
Yes,
and
I love it.
I really feel like this is something that needs to exist.
I'm in for that. That sounds great.
I think it's that Quincy never has the opportunity to offend our modern sensibilities in a sense. Like I get the Winchesters thing, but he never says anything like, overly patronizing to Mina or, so like he's the one that, because all the other guys have serious issues, especially dealing with women. And Quincy never quite goes there. I guess you could say he's patronizing the way he worships Mina, just like all the others. But
But he's like the one
Quincy's-
kind of genuine tough guy, and he doesn't have any of the sort of chauvinistic stuff. All the rest of
No.
it.
Quincy's so
because he's
interesting as well.
American. He's American.
He's modern. That's the thing about Quincy that I think it's a shame that, like, I think it is the thing to do in adaptations, because adapting Dracula is really difficult because it's a big text. But Quincy is so interesting because if you lose Quincy, you lose some of that camp element. Not that Quincy brings the camp, but Quincy highlights the camp in other people, because Quincy, by being the kind of straight talking modern representation, he's not the straight man because he's funny, but he kind of highlights the ridiculousness in the others. So when they're kind of getting a little bit bogged down in the very British problems that they are having, Quincy's the one to be like, you guys are stupid, let's just shoot him. Like, and I love that. I think that's so great.
Yeah, we really needed the Maxim gun.
He's the best.
That was perfect. But also, I'm thinking too that like he's extraordinarily important for Stoker. I mean, come on, he gets the death scene final words in the novel proper. They're his he's the last character that speaks before the note, you know what I mean? And so Stoker thinks that he's extraordinarily important as the heroic figure.
And they named a kid after him.
Yes, and the child's named after him. I mean, he kind of nudges aside Jonathan because he's building up Jonathan. Like he's after that beginning, I think Stoker realizes that I have to build Jonathan up into the hero, and Jonathan really gives the death kill because he's the one that kind of cuts off Dracula's head. But Quincy becomes the hero of the novel in a sense. So that's curious to me that
I can see
apparently Stoker thought he was the hero, but we don't think he's the hero.
I can see people saying in the comments, but my kind of theory about Quincy, which now I'm thinking maybe is less of a conspiracy theory because I can see people agreeing with me before I've said it. So I feel like it's not just me. Quincy's presence and Quincy's death is that kind of like compounding Dracula as the foreign other.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Quincy's the kind of physical embodiment of modernity and future and change.
Is that American change?
Yeah,
American
like
future?
As you know, and he uses a gun, like he's kind of free of some of the more confining sensibilities of some of the other characters. Like,
this fascinates me because the British Empire is not yet in decline in 1887. This is the literal height.
This is the peak
of the British Empire.
This is the peak, but there's a whole school of thought that America represents the pinnacle of colonialism. Like, yes, they haven't been part of the British Empire for quite some time by this point, but there's this idea that kind of, you know, this is the possibility and the potentiality of this global expansion and this change. Dracula coming in and invading Britain implies that then if Britain falls, then everything else is going to fall. So I've always kind of seen it as this weird sort of like, you know, this is the threat, this is the risk, is that this person who seems so far removed, who isn't necessarily a threat by, you know, a Transylvanian count who's going to come to London, sees that this is something that's important for the whole world and has to kind of give his life, which maybe that's me being biased as someone who looks at war. I kind of see it as almost predicting what's going to come in the next kind of 20, 30 years, but it kind of gives that sort of, it's like almost like an early idea of global modernity and globalization. And Quincy's death and the significance of his death and the fact that he's the legacy character, like he's the one the child is named after. He's the one who, you know, they're going to say, oh, who was Quincy? So I think that kind of is really interesting because it's not, usually these novels end with someone moving to the countryside, someone moving to America for a new start. And instead we have an American dying in Transylvania in the company of mostly Brits. And then he's going to be memorialized by a British boy born at the turn of the century.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's really fascinating. And I think maybe something that we don't think about very often. But then again, Quincy's my favorite character.
That's a great that's a great ending summation of the novel too, and how it ends.
So in my putting together of the Beyond Stoker website, I found that
you can tell everybody about right now. Go ahead.
So I'm putting together a list of all the stories that the characters appear in since the novel was published.
Literary, written, right?
Yeah, written.
Short stories, novels, plays, poems.
I haven't gotten
any poems yet.
There's a couple poems, but I included them in with the short stories because they're usually included in short story collections.
Okay.
There's a handful. There's even a transcribed comedy sketch by Lenny Bruce in there.
Wow. Okay. I think I know that. Lenny Bruce used to do tons of different characters in his routines. Yeah.
But after Van Helsing and Mina, Quincy is the most used character after.
Interesting.
After
That's interesting. He is the most
not
easy
more
to
than,
like.
Not more than Dracula.
Oh no, not more than Dracula.
But more than Van Helsing?
No, it goes Dracula, Van Helsing, Mina, and then Quincy.
Interesting.
How about that?
Neither Stewart nor Harker.
Come on. And where's the Arthur? Where's the Lord Godalming?
Arthur is fan fiction as a character. Like Arthur's already fanfic in the novel. Like he's just Regency fan fiction in 1897.
Yeah, there you go. So, all righty. Let me take let's do the mid break now. And for the mid break, I just want to talk about Sundays with Frankenstein. Thank you, Judge. The registration is now up. Steve, you can now put the registration in the link that you guys can register for Sundays with Frankenstein. I'm trying to find it right here on to share the page. There it is. Thank you. So let me share it. This has never gotten smooth, this process. There we go. Sundays with Frankenstein, you can now register for it. It'll take you right to the Zoom registration link. And it's got all the dates, and even on the webpage, I have the breakdown of how we're putting this together. They're the co-hosts, which I'll talk about in just a moment. You guys who are all co-hosting. Anastasia is there as well. And I'm pretty sure she's in the chat today watching the show. And there's also a Facebook group, which is also live right now. And so we can stop putting all of these Frankenstein related posts into our Dracula group. There is actually a Facebook account right now. Show all window. Yeah, that's it. So here's the Facebook page for 11 people want to join this group. You all just jumped in right away. So as soon as Steve put the link up there, and the top of the line here, 2 minutes ago, 1 minute. So let's go to the bottom. Who was first? Minute ago. It looks like I can't do it just one. So it's Jim Lambert and Holly, and I'm just approving you guys live. I'm just going to approve all live. So where's the approve all? There it is. Approve all. 11 people have now joined. I'm interested to see who will be the first person to post on the Facebook group. But you can register now. Yes, somebody will be first. I'll look at that. I'll look up that a little bit later. That's easier to find. One of the things I wanted to let you guys know, though, about Sundays with Frankenstein, because there's been posts all over the Dracula group, is to slow down. This doesn't start until January 24th. And here's my fear. Everybody's like, oh, wow, here's my edition of Frankenstein, and I'm reading it right now. If you read it now and you start posting about it now, it's not for 2 months that we're going to start this show. So I want to let everybody know that, like, it's coming up, and maybe you don't want to just completely throw all your energy out today. There are things you could do. I'm going to actually propose on the Facebook group Frankenstein movies we can watch. I'm going to propose some books we can read, either some Mary Shelley, books that Mary Shelley read, books that influenced this novel, that kind of things. And I'm going to propose in the kind of lead up to it. But I have been a little bit afraid over the last, week since I made the announcement, or 2 weeks since I made the announcement, that people will be, kind of talking too much about it now. And 2 months from now, when we start it, you'll be like, yeah, I already talked about all that on the Facebook group, or I already read all that stuff. So my recommendation is to start reading the novel in January, especially towards when we're going to start on January 24th. It will be 15 weeks. Less than we're doing for Dracula. I didn't think that the same weekly reading would be as good for this novel, even though there are so many rich things we can talk about in the novel for every single chapter. It kind of worked out to combine most of the chapters. So that's what we're going to be doing. It'll be 15 weeks long, 14 weeks actually, for just the letters will start, and then it's mostly 2 chapters a meeting, and then May 2nd it will end, and that will be an after show party, just like we're doing today. What's in store for the new show? New co-hosts, Mary and Lauren are returning, which I am completely totally excited for. I'm so happy to talk about. I will be so happy to talk about Frankenstein with you guys. But we also have Anastasia Klimchinskaya, who is one of our Dracuphiles in our chat all the time. She's also been on Monday Drac Chat. I am very excited to have her be a part of this. I've known Anastasia for a few years now, almost like when I first started working the Rosenbach. I met Anastasia for a Sherlock Holmes group, actually, that she was doing in Philadelphia at the time, and now she's out in Chicago, and she's wonderful. And Dan Hodge will be the other co-host, and Dan is an extraordinarily great actor. Josh, you know Dan, right?
I do. Great actor, great director.
A great actor director from Philadelphia, done wonderful things. I've had him at the Rosenbach to do a couple things, including his he does a one-man performance of Shakespeare's Rape of Lucrece poem that, like, when do you ever get to see that, read exceptionally well. Dan's really great, and I'm very excited to have him, because he also has a he's kind of fulfilling your role, because he has a big Frankenstein collection, and it's mostly movies over the years that he has collected, but he started collecting when he was a very young age. He even has correspondence with people from films and things like that. He has several. He was corresponding for a while with James Bernard, who did with my album back here, who did the scores for the Hammer movies. Dan started corresponding with him and asking him questions and things like that. So Dan comes from more of the film side, but he's also such a brilliant reader, as I know, because he is a brilliant actor director, that he'll be fun to have on the show. So Mary and Lauren will be together again as we have on these, and then Dan and Anastasia would do the others. Tamworth Distilling will be the drink sponsor for the show, and they will help me design a new cocktail for every week. So that kind of takes the load off of me. I don't have to come up with a cocktail every week. Like, I will do it in consultation with them, and we'll do them all early on, and there'll be a lot more of that involved, that sponsorship involved, which will be really nice. And I'm really looking forward to that. There will be special guests on the show, as we've had with the run of this one. And luckily this time, they'll all be announced probably by the time we start the show on January 24th. The whole schedule of special guests will already be up there. So the nice thing about doing this, as opposed to Sundays with Dracula, is that I can do everything over the next 2 months to prep for the show. And Sundays with Dracula was, oh my gosh, we're just going to start in a couple weeks on May 3rd. I have to do it was like a seat of my pants as it was going on, putting together every show. So we'll have special guests on the show. I've already got some people lined who I'm pretty sure will be on, and a few more. It won't be a special guest every week. I'm thinking anywhere from 5 to 7 of the 15 will have a special guest on them. The structure of the show will be a little bit different in that it's going to be a 2-hour show, and it's probably going to be a 2-hour show. It'll very much end at 2 hours. I won't be stretching, especially when I have Lauren and Mary on, because I have the two of them get to talk, and I love that. So I never want to stop that. So Mary and Lauren, your shows are the longest of all the shows. So like even the average is longer. We almost always go to like close to, a half hour over the 2-hour mark. And I love that. But these shows are going to be a little more structured, and at the top of we'll start at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, but the start of the second hour will be the collections segment, in which I actually share what we have in our collections from Mary Shelley. We have letters. We have a first edition of Frankenstein. We have letters from Mary Shelley to different people over the course of her life, and some other related things. Like we have the draft manuscript of Byron's Prometheus poem that he wrote that summer that they were all together. And we have that in our collection. So there'll be different things I can share every week. And also we're going to talk about the manuscript pages of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which are not in our collection. They're in the Bodleian. But fortunately, they have all been published online in the Shelley Godwin archive under a Creative Commons license. So I can share those on a free show according to the way the Creative Commons license goes. So we can actually talk about the manuscript pages from Mary Shelley on our show as well. So there'll be a collection segment at the top of every hour. And then there's also going to be a rotating short segment every show that'll happen in the second hour. And one week we'll have on a kind of Frankenfile of the week. Somebody from the audience will come on for about 10 minutes or so and talk about their connection to the novel and their love of the novel and the things that they like about this topic. And then on the alternating weeks, one of the co-hosts will talk about their a Frankenstein movie adaptation that they particularly like, or really any adaptation. It could be anything, an adaptation that they like every week. So we'll add that to it as well. There will be no Frank chat for this one. I love the Monday Drac Chat show that we do, but in doing that, we kind of every week it kind of clogs up the week then. So if I want to have extra programs, then it's often asking people too much to tune in 3 times during a week. So there won't be a Frank chat show. Instead, every month, starting in February, there will be a program that we put out related to Frankenstein that is for the general public, that is a paid program. But if you're a member, if you're a Dracula Club member, even, because you guys, if you're Dracula Club members, you're actually Rosenbach members for the next year, you also get discounts on these programs. But there'll be a program every month, a paid program that'll be a Frankenstein inspired program that we'll do. And there'll also be a program every month that is only for members. That will be free to members, and members can attend. So we'll have 2 extra programs a month that I'll do besides the Sunday show. And of course, just like I've done with Dracula, there's a Read the Blood of Dracula course that we're running right now every month. There will also be a Frankenstein course. I might call it Frankentexts. I'm not quite sure. And it'll be books inspired by, or maybe books that maybe Mary Shelley was reading that really inspired this. There might even be a movie that we do, or a course meeting that we focus on some of the Frankenstein films. So that course will also start to run during the run of it. So I have had, and I think it'll be as much fun as we've had doing Frankenstein, as much fun as we've had doing Dracula, we will have doing Frankenstein. So I can't wait for it to start. I'm no, I can wait for it to start. So I've got a lot of, I still got a lot of prep work to do for it. And I also need a little rest. I'm going to take a couple weeks off from work very soon. So I can wait, but once it starts, it'll be extraordinarily exciting and a lot of fun. And I also want to let you guys know too that the Dracufile fun will continue. Just because we're ending Sundays with Dracula, I'm not going to stop talking about vampires and Dracula next year and only talk about Frankenstein. The Read the Blood of Dracula course sessions that I'm doing, they will continue with a whole new slate that I'll announce that will be available for registration next month. And the first one, and I say this now because there's also a question in the Q&A today to talk about Dracula's guest. But actually, that's going to be the first meeting in January. I'm going to have a course session on Dracula's guest that we will all talk about if you register for it. And that's like a course. That's different than these Sundays with Dracula meetings. That's more that I use a Zoom meeting format. So up to 25 people, and it's been 25 people, for the courses, are all sharing the screen with me. And we have a discussion about different works. And we have Carmilla in December, and next month, and that's sold out. And then, but in January, we'll start up again, and we'll start with Dracula's guest. And then we'll probably almost certainly move to I Am Legend by Richard Matheson after that. And then there's a few other great vampire works that I'd like to cover as we go along. And I see Read the Blood of Dracula as an ongoing thing. As long as people register for it, as long as I get like 8 to 10 people at the minimum to register for it, it's something I'll do every month forever. Like I don't see the need to stop doing it. It gives me a great outlet to talk about vampire stuff, and especially to bring other people in to talk about it with. So that will continue. I'll also come up with some very cool programs, talks, interviews that